From 1918 to 1931, 60 or more full-blood Osage Native Americans were either murdered or died under mysterious circumstances. Why? They were wealthy. So wealthy that no other group of individuals in the world at that time had more money per capita. And with money comes greed. And boy, did it come. Corrupt white men wanted to take advantage of the Osage Nation's newfound wealth, and they were willing to do anything to get their hands on the money. And one family in particular was a prime target. This is the real story of the Osage Nation and the killers of the Flower Moon. Hey y'all, I'm Chris Calvert.
And I'm her husband, Rob Pottorff. Welcome to Hitched to Homicide.
For better or worse.
Till death do us part.
Welcome back, everybody.
Yes, welcome. And for our friends in Missourium, Chibai.
Where? Wait, where?
Chibai.
Where are we again?
Missourium's a state in the northeast India.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
okay.
And Mizo is their native language. So, I thought I'd go really obscure.
That was a deep cut from the album.
Yeah, that was a very deep dive.
That's a deep cut, man.
Yeah. And Scotty welcomes you too.
That's right. Well, wherever you're listening, be sure to like, rate, or review. And if you're watching on YouTube, be sure to hit that subscribe button.
Please do.
And you can join the In-Laws and Outlaws because, in fact, when I was working on this script, I was even thinking, I'm talking about in-laws and outlaws today. Oh. Those particular things. We're actually doing a case on in-laws and outlaws.
All right.
I know. Crazy. Yeah. This is such an amazing story. When I get to the end, I'm going to tell you about a movie that's being made.
Oh, really?
Even one of Rob's buddies is in this movie. Oh, so wow. I'm just going to keep him on pins and needles until the very end.
Okay.
But this story is just amazing. These indigenous people, Oklahoma, I have a soft spot for this because my grandmother was part of the Cherokee Nation in the Carolinas. So don't send me emails. I'm not half Cherokee or anything like that. I'm like 1/16 or 132. 132nd, is that it?
You got a little Cherokee.
I have just a little bit of Cherokee Indian blood in me.
All right.
But this case is just absolutely crazy. Wait till you hear this. I had no idea when I started researching this case, everything that it entailed. But oh my goodness, this is really intriguing and very interesting and really sad too. Oh. Very sad. Before we get started, I want to thank some sources: Wikipedia, OklahomaHistory.org, FBI.gov, The Oklahoman, The New York Times, the 1920s channel on YouTube, and Killers of the Flower Moon, The Osage Murders, and the Birth of the FBI by David Grann. I did read it. I will post a link to that book and all the other sources in the show notes.
All right, you ready?
I am.
All right, let's do it.
The Osage Nation means people of the Middle Waters. They're a Midwestern Native American indigenous tribe of the Great Plains. The tribe developed in the Ohio and Mississippi River valleys around 700 BC, along with other groups of its language family.
Okay.
The Osage people migrated west after the 17th century, settling near the union of the Missouri and the Mississippi rivers. This is because the Iroquois Nation was invading the Ohio Valley in search of new hunting grounds, and these two tribes were at war.
Okay.
Osage is a French version of the tribe's name, which can be roughly translated as calm water. The Osage people referred to themselves in their indigenous language as Wahazi, or mid-waters.
Okay.
Now, if I mess up any of these Indian names, I did my best to research these. So please excuse my mispronunciation if I do anything wrong, people of the Osage Nation.
Well, since you're not full Cherokee, I think you'll be forgiven.
Okay, thanks. Yeah.
Yep.
By the early 19th century, the Osage people had become the dominant power in the region, and they were feared by most neighboring tribes. They controlled the area between the Missouri and Red Rivers, the Ozarks to the east, and the foothills of the Wichita Mountains.
All right.
They're nomadic buffalo hunters, and they're farmers. Their native language was Dagehan and is shared by other Native American indigenous tribes of the Kansa, Ponca, Omaha, and Quapaw. They were also known as being really tall, and one missionary described them as, quote, an uncommonly fierce, courageous, and warlike nation.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So pretty impressive.
Yeah. Did they yell Omaha, Omaha when they went into battle? Like Peyton Manning does?
Okay, Peyton Manning. Okay.
All right, sorry.
Yeah. Osage people believe they are an integral part of a broader universe. Their ceremonies and social organization represented what was observed around them, and that was what was created by the Great Spirit, or Wakanda.
Okay.
Which made me think of Black Panther.
Oh, yeah.
It's spelled differently and it's pronounced a little bit differently. I think I'm mispronouncing Wakanda.
Okay.
I think it's Wakanda.
Gotcha.
But in the 19th century, the Osage were forced by the United States to leave Kansas to what they called Indian Territory, which is now present-day Oklahoma.
Okay.
And the first treaty with the United States, the Osage ceded their lands and moved to this reservation. So the government actually moves this entire Indian nation, and others, of course. But the Osage were one of the few American Indian nations to buy their own reservation.
Really?
And because of this, they retained more rights to the land.
Oh, wow.
Specifically, they retained the mineral rights to their lands. 1,470,000 acres,
Wow.
which is the present day Osage County.
Okay.
Now, after moving, the Osage suffered many hardships. During their early years on their new territory, the United States government didn't give them their full cash annuities that they were due. And during this time, and in the late 1870s, the Osage people had a 50% decline in their population.
Okay.
In 1897, an Osage delegation went to Washington, D.C. and demanded what was promised to them.
Sure.
Then in 1894, large quantities of oil were discovered beneath the huge prairie lands that were owned by the Osage tribe.
Did they move to Beverly?
I mean, just wait. They kind of do.
Oh,
Just
wow.
wait.
Okay.
A man named Henry Foster went to the Bureau of Indian Affairs and requested exclusive privileges to explore the Osage Reservation for oil and natural gas. Now, he's going to die, but his brother picked up where he left off.
Okay.
And the Bureau of Indian Affairs granted Henry's request, but only if Foster paid the Osage tribe a 10% royalty on all sales of petroleum produced on the reservation.
All right.
By 1906, they were forced to accept an allotment act. Each of the 2,228 registered Osage members in 1906 received 657 acres. In 1907, the Osage principal chief, James Burkhart, reached a deal with the United States government that allowed the community to keep the mineral rights on the reservation lands.
Nice.
The government leased lands on their behalf for oil development, and the companies and the government sent the Osage members royalties that by the 1920s had dramatically increased their wealth
Sure.
by millions and millions of dollars.
Yeah. Good for them.
The 2,228 registered Osage members own this land and the mineral rights collectively as a group. And when one dies, the remaining heir inherits their share.
Okay.
Each of the 2,028 had what were called headrights. The term was coined during the colonization in America, but for the Osage, it was the beneficial interest for each member in the tribal trust fund.
Okay.
So it's lots of money and tons of room for greed and corruption.
Sure.
The Osage were living in high cotton. They were buying cars. They were building these beautiful homes. They had white men working as their domestics in their homes.
There you go.
And while all this oil and gas is being gleaned from their lands, tons of little boom towns sprouted up in the area. And that meant loads of oil workers were filing in to work the fields.
Sure.
In the early 1920s, the Osage people were the richest per capita in the world.
Really?
Yeah, loads of publications printed stories on the Osage Nation. I watched a documentary where a member of the Osage Nation talked about the articles mostly being about, quote, those rich Indians. And I want to point out that Indian, the word Indian, has never been a word of the indigenous people of what we now call America.
Really? I didn't know
It
that.
was given by Christopher Columbus, who thought he'd landed in the
India.
Indies.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
The United States government, in all their infinite wisdom, decided that the Osage weren't capable of handling so much money on their own. So they created a guardianship program whereby another person, a white man, sometimes an attorney, would be in complete control of the individual Osage headright assets.
Wow.
And another way to control the headrights, marry an Osage woman. But to add insult to injury, these guardians took a fee for their service.
Of course they did.
So just to recap to this point, the United States government forces them off their land and into Indian territory in Oklahoma.
Wow.
Then the Osage buy their own land from the government. I mean, they're smart.
Yeah.
They buy their own land from the government. And when the natural resources are found on the property, the oil, the gas, the Osage begin to make all this money. And the government comes in again and says, well, we forced you from where you lived to this place. And we allowed you to buy this land, and now it's actually valuable, and you're making money off of it, so we need to regulate it. Which is code for we're going to control you and open the door for corruption and for our own benefit.
Yep.
And that's exactly what they did.
Yeah.
And this is where our story begins. I know that was a lot of backstory, but I just wanted you to understand this Osage Nation, these people, and how this all sort of started.
Sure.
By 1921, the Osage were making so much money, the bankers were jealous. I read that in a newspaper. The boom towns were filled with cowboys and bootleggers and outlaws and in-laws, New York financiers, oil magnates, and the Osage people.
Right.
There was one man, William K. Hale, a local cattleman who called himself the King of the Osage Hills. He told people he was a, quote, true friend to the Osage people.
I'm sure he was.
That's called foreshadowing.
There we go.
He was born on Christmas Eve in 1874 in Texas. He arrived on the Osage Reservation just before the turn of the 20th century. He dominated local politics and built his power and prestige on granting gifts and favors to people, then putting them under his obligation. He dealt with bootleggers, murderers, robbers, and loads of fine, upstanding citizens of the Osage area. He was named a reserve deputy sheriff in Fairfax, a position that he would hold forever. It was honorary mostly, but it allowed him to carry this badge and a pistol.
Wow.
Before the Osage people had money, William was the county's greatest benefactor. He donated to charities and schools and a hospital. And I'm just going to say it now. William Hale is a wolf in sheep's clothing.
Okay.
It's 1921 and the Osage are doing really well financially, but bad things were happening all around them. Osage people were dying. Accidents, unexplained deaths, it all seemed to be happening more and more. In 1921, Charles Whitehorn, a 30-year-old Osage man, goes missing. He left his home to go to Pawhuska and never returned. Now, I want you to meet the Kyle family. Anna Kyle Brown, age 34, Mollie Kyle Burkhart, age 33, and Rita Kyle Smith. 3 living daughters of Lizzie Kyle. Their father had already passed away.
Okay.
But there were 4 girls. One of the daughters had died. Her name was Minnie, and she died mysteriously in 1918. Now, this family was part of the Osage Nation and lived in what's called the Gray Horse area of Oklahoma. So many amazing names. It's all the last names, the places where they live. It's just amazing.
Yeah.
Anna was a divorcee who enjoyed her newfound wealth. She liked to party and she liked to dance the night away.
And that was even before Van Halen.
And it was before Van Halen, yeah. She was I don't want to say she was a wild child. She enjoyed her life. Yeah. Anna enjoyed her life.
Sure.
She went on what her family would call sprees, quote, sprees.
Today we're known as binges.
Yeah, she would go out drinking and dancing and come home the next morning. Yeah, exactly. This was all after she divorced Oda Brown.
Okay.
Daughter Rita married Bill Smith, a 29-year-old horse thief who'd actually been married to her sister Minnie first.
Good grief.
After Minnie's mysterious death, he wed Rita.
Okay. He kept it in the family.
Yeah, he's keeping, these people are keeping it in the family for sure.
Right.
That's called foreshadowing.
Right.
Her sister Mollie was married to a white man, 28-year-old Ernest Burkhart. Ernest grew up in Texas. His family were poor cotton farmers. And in 1912, when he was just 19 years old, he packed his bags and headed to Osage to be with his uncle, a cattleman named William Hale.
Okay.
His uncle William became his father figure, and Ernest ran lots of errands for his uncle. He was kind of a lackey. That's sort of what I read in every publication about Ernest.
Okay.
So whatever William Hale said, Ernest was like, "How high do you want me to jump?
Sure.
Jump how high?"
Sure.
But he's also a livery driver, and this is how he meets Mollie Kyle. Mollie spoke the indigenous language of the Osage, but she had also been to school and she knew English. Ernest was so taken with her, he learned her language so he could speak with her.
Oh, wow.
Mollie suffered from diabetes, and Ernest liked taking care of his girlfriend. But when another suitor appeared, it said that Ernest said he could not live without Mollie. And in 1917, Mollie and Ernest married.
Okay.
They would have a daughter, Elizabeth, and a son, James, who they called Cowboy. What's your name? Cowboy. What do you do? I'm a cowboy.
I'm a cowboy.
Mm-hmm.
What's your name, cowboy?
Cowboy.
What do you do for a living? I'm an accountant.
Yeah, right. Exactly. By 1921, these three girls and their mother were doing very well financially. And even though Anna is the oldest daughter, Mollie seemed to be the responsible one. Anna had divorced her husband, Oda, and was living it up. And I read that one of her favorite places to party was Whiz Bang, Oklahoma.
There's a place called Whiz Bang?
There is a place called Whiz Bang.
I want to party with
and
you.
And this is what it said. It was a place where people, quote, whizzed all day and banged all night, end quote.
I don't even want to know.
Well, and when I read this, I laughed because whiz bang is a term of endearment in our house.
Yeah.
If you do something asinine in our house, in our family, you'll get called whiz bang. What are you doing, whiz bang?
Yeah, exactly.
But on the day of May 21st, 1921, Mollie had her sister, Anna, and her mother in her home. Ernest was there along with his brother, who had made his way from Texas to Osage, Brian.
Okay.
Anna is drunk when she arrives, and she's flirting with Brian, a man she sometimes dated.
Okay.
The whole lot of them are planning on going to the Fairfax Theater, where they're going to meet William Hale, and they're going to see a musical that was touring, Bringing Up Father.
Okay.
Now, Anna didn't go with the rest of them, and while the rest of them left for the theater, Brian Burkhart drove Anna away. By May 23rd, 1921, Mollie and her mother and her sister Rita were worried because 3 days earlier, she drove away with Brian, and now there was no sign of Anna anywhere.
Oh, okay.
And, she went on her sprees. So they're thinking, she's off. She'll turn up.
Sure.
That's what they're thinking. She's going to turn up.
Yeah.
A week later, an oil worker finds the body of the first man we just spoke about who went missing, Charles Whitehorn. His body was found in the brush a mile from downtown Pawhuxa. His body was rotting, but you could still see that he had been shot execution style between the eyes.
Wow.
They ID him not by his face, but by a letter in his pocket with his name on it.
Okay.
Soon after, like a couple of days after, a man and his son are hunting by the 3 Mile Creek in Fairfax when they stumble upon the black, bloated, and maggot-infested body of Anna Brown.
Wow.
When the man and his son go into town, they go to Bill Hill Trading Company, which was a general store and an undertaking business.
Well, there's a combination.
Yeah, and when I read that, all I could think of was it's like general store, we got the blacksmith, undertaking.
Yeah. We do it all here.
Dry goods. It was a little bit of everything.
It's a birthing station and an undertaker.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I mean, it is. It was a one-stop shop.
Yep.
They tell the owner, Scott Mathis, what they found. And it just so happened that Mr. Mathis managed Anna Brown's financial affairs.
Okay.
He was her guardian,
Right.
and he recognized Anna. So he calls her sister Mollie, who along with her husband Ernest and his brother Brian, and then the other sister Rita and her husband Bill Smith, they all go down to this creek bed where Anna's body is.
Okay.
And there are other rubberneckers who have heard the news and they're just joining in, including a local bootlegger and drug dealer named Kelsey Morrison and his Osage wife. The two sisters ID Anna by her clothes because she was so black and bloated.
Sure.
It was just really hard.
Yeah.
Two doctors, James and David Schoen, did the autopsy. She had one perfectly round hole in her head because Anna was shot through the crown, through the top. But when the Schoen brothers go looking for the bullet that should be lodged in Anna's brain, they find nothing.
Really?
They look all around where her body has been dumped. No bullet. All they find are 2 sets of tire tracks and a bottle of moonshine. Now, you'd think that 2 murders would stir the ire of the local sheriff.
Right.
Well, meet 58-year-old, 300-pound Harvey Freeze, a man people said was tough on crime, but the reality was he was friends with people like Kelsey Morrison, the bootlegger, and other criminals in town, and it was even said that he ran a brothel out of the jailhouse.
Once again, one-stop shopping.
Yeah. So the wild, wild west.
Jeez.
But when I read that he was, 300 pounds and just, running a brothel, can you just imagine this guy?
He sounds like a cartoon character.
He really does.
Yeah.
The funeral was an astronomical $6,000 in 1921. That's an $80,000 funeral today.
Wow.
But this wasn't anything new to the Osage people because merchants would have 2 different pricing tiers for goods and services. One for the Osage, which was jacked up,
Sure.
and one for everybody else.
Wow.
Because they didn't think that these people deserved all this money.
Pitiful.
After her funeral, after Anna's funeral, and that of Charles Whitehorn, the families wanted answers, but the white men who ran the town and the government didn't seem to care about 2 dead Osage people. Or the fact that the last known person to see her was Brian Burkhart, who said that he left her at her house after leaving Mollie and Ernest's home. He's never questioned about that again.
Really?
Never.
Okay, you're clear.
Among many, it was said that an outsider murdered Anna because there were loads of criminals who were hiding out in the Osage Hills, which was true. Like if you wanted to rob and kill, you headed into these Osage Hills just to live. I mean, it's almost like terrorists living in the mountain caves.
Exactly.
It's really hard to find people.
Right.
They tossed around the idea that Anna's ex-husband, Oda Brown, was the killer. But at her funeral, he was so distraught over her death.
Really?
Yes. After the divorce, she denied him any inheritance, and Anna left all of her fortune to her mother, Lizzie.
Wow.
She left her headrights to her mom, went back to the family.
Right.
But nothing was being pursued by the county prosecutor, a man who, like many of the other officials in town, owed a debt of gratitude and favors to William Hale.
Yeah.
So anytime anything was brought to the table or evidence came to light, William Hale was on top of it first.
He's kind of like an extortionist, isn't he?
He's worse.
Yeah.
He's worse. They even exhumed Anna's body at one point to find the bullet that still wasn't there. And they still found nothing. Like I read the information about the autopsy. They basically split her skull and went through her brains with their hands to find this bullet, and there was nothing there.
Nothing.
By July 1921, the justice of the peace closed the case. Anna's death was due to, quote, parties unknown, end quote. But the matriarch of the family, Lizzie, the mom, she's not doing well at all. She'd already lost one daughter, Minnie, to a mysterious illness, and now Anna had been murdered, and the case was cold, and that was that.
Right.
2 months later in July, Lizzie died. A mysterious illness had taken her down. Now, they like to say that she died of a broken heart, but in retrospect, I don't think she died of a broken heart.
Yeah. It's too suspicious.
It's all suspicious.
Yeah.
Everything about this is hinky.
Yeah.
This is where the word hinky started in Osage County, and I'm not even kidding you.
Really?
No, it didn't start there. I'm just saying it's the perfect example of hinky.
I thought you were serious. Like, wow.
I do not know the etymology of hinky, but I will look it up. I promise for the next podcast, I'll know.
I thought hinky started here.
Right in this studio.
Yeah.
No. You want the real story behind hinky?
Yeah.
Hinky was a word that one of my editors used when I was writing a murder mystery. She wrote in the margin, "This is hinky. You need to explore this more." And I was like, okay, it is hinky. I like that word. And then it just kind of stuck.
Does she know where it came from?
You know what? Meg is so smart. Shout out to one of my editors, Meg. She's so brilliant.
Yeah.
I'm sure she does. Like, she's one of these people who's done the Jeopardy test and like gotten through. She's never been on the show, but she's a teacher. I love teachers. She's amazing.
Wow. Shout
Shout out to Meg.
Thanks, Meg.
Meg Weglars, you're the best.
Let us know where hinky came from.
I bet she will too. But Bill Smith, Rita's husband, and Mollie's brother-in-law wondered why Lizzie seemed to fall so ill so quickly and died so suddenly.
Sure.
And Bill, this is the son-in-law, Bill thinks it's hinky.
Mm-hmm.
And Bill thinks that Lizzie was slowly poisoned.
Yeah. Well, that was the first thing that I thought of.
Yes, because I think Minnie was poisoned as well. Now, meanwhile, the family has offered up to $2,000 for any information on the murder of Anna. And Charles Whitehorn's family did the same, offering up like $2,500. And in the background is William Hale pounding his fist and saying, "We've got to stop this bloody business," end quote.
Why was he so adamant about stopping?
Because he's grandstanding.
Yeah.
Distract.
Okay.
Distract.
Yeah. Don't look over here.
Don't look over here.
Yeah.
And remember, he said he's a friend to the Osage people.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what he's saying. We've got to stop this bloody business.
Mm-hmm.
Then William Hale recruited a private detective from Kansas City who went by the name Pike. It wasn't his real name. He used it so he didn't have to use his own name. He was undercover. I could not find what Pike's real name was, and he's going to come back in this story.
Okay.
Another man who had hired a private investigator was Scott Mathis, the Big Hill Trading Company owner. He was the financial advisor for Anna and Lizzie, and he was their guardian. He managed their money.
Right.
And because Lizzie and Anna were deemed incompetent, Scott put together a team of private eyes and did the estate for Whitehorn, for Charles Whitehorn. The private investigator hired by Scott Mathis was looking into the Osage deaths, and his name was William J. Burns.
Okay.
A man who was a celebrated private investigator who was also known to rig juries, kidnap suspects, and steal evidence.
Well, there you go.
Everybody is a criminal.
It's
the wild, wild west.
Yeah.
So everyone is hiring their own person to look into the death of Anna, and they're all running around like chickens with their heads cut off,
Right.
and they're all going in different directions.
Right.
The PIs, the private investigators, did share what they knew with Bill Smith, Rita's husband, and Mollie's brother-in-law twice. Bill was also known to beat his wife, Rita, on occasion. And the funny thing was, William Hale didn't trust Bill Smith, and he made that pretty widely known.
Okay.
So let me just clear this up for you. William Hale is the uncle to Mollie's husband, Ernest.
Okay.
But the sister is married to a man named Bill Smith. And because Bill Smith is not part of William Hale's family, Bill is married to Rita. And because Bill Smith's not a family member to William Hale, he didn't trust him as far as he could throw him.
I need a sports program here because...
Well, if you're watching the YouTube channel, there's going to be a breakdown
right.
so you can see. Yeah.
You can't tell the players without a program.
Yeah. But this case is cold. And even the private investigators are like, we're done. There's nothing we can do here.
Sure.
Then in February of 1922, just 9 months after Charles Whitehorn and Anna Brown are found dead, William's stepson, a 29-year-old Osage champion steer roper, gets a call. He leaves his home in Fairfax, and a few hours later, he returns home to his wife and 2 children. He's gravely ill. He had always been in great health, like he was kind of an athlete as a steer roper.
Right.
But within hours of coming home, William is dead.
Wow.
And when he's examined after the death, it's thought that he was poisoned. And I've seen an interview with his grandson who said his grandfather drank poisoned whiskey. His sudden onset symptoms were that of someone with strychnine poisoning because his muscles convulsed like he was like being electrocuted. His jaw would tighten and eventually his lungs constricted and he couldn't breathe.
Wow.
It's a horrible way to die.
Yes, I can imagine.
But no toxicology report was done because he was Osage and they didn't care.
Wow.
A month later, on March 26, 1922, another Osage woman died of suspected poisoning. Again, no toxicology report was done. July 28th, Joe Bates, an Osage man in his 30s, got some whiskey from a stranger and after taking a sip began to froth at the mouth.
Wow.
Now, by August of that year, many of the Osage had asked for a man named Barney McBride to go to Washington, D.C. on their behalf because they needed help with these murders and these mysterious deaths.
Yeah.
Barney was a 55-year-old oil man, and the Osage trusted him. His late wife was part of the Creek Nation, and he was thought as this kind-hearted and trustworthy man. He was somebody that they really liked.
Okay.
He was a good man. He was salt of the earth.
Right.
This is salt of the earth guy.
Right.
So he goes to Washington, and when he arrives at the boarding house where he's staying, there's a telegram waiting for him that an associate said had 2 words on it. Be careful.
Whoa. Really?
Yes.
Wow. This is like a mystery movie.
Yes, it is.
Wow.
Barney carried with him on his journey the Bible and a 45. Barney's my kind of man.
I was about to say, that's pretty much all you need in life. A Bible and a 45. There you go.
Yep.
It'll get you through.
That night, he went to the Elks Club in Washington, D.C. to play billiards. And when he was leaving the club, someone grabbed him, threw a bag over his head, and whisked him away.
Wow.
The next morning, his body was found naked, beaten, and stabbed more than 20 times in a ditch in Maryland. He was naked except for his shoes and his socks, and tucked into one of his socks was his name, Barney McBride.
Wow.
Yeah. They're not messing around.
Wow.
They do not want anybody to help the Osage people.
Scary, scary, scary.
February 1923, 2 men are out hunting near Fairfax when they see a car at the bottom of a rocky ravine. Inside the Buick was a man who had been fatally shot in the back of the head.
Wow.
It was Rowan Horse, an Osage man.
Okay.
The justice of the peace is notified, of course. William Hale is notified, who was the guardian of Rowan's money.
His name just keeps popping up.
Yes, it does. William Hale was even the beneficiary of Rowan's $25,000 life insurance policy.
Of course he was.
Yes.
Yeah.
And a couple weeks before the murder, Rowan went to William Hale, who he thought was his best friend, and told him he was distraught because his wife was having an affair. Again, the case is colder than a cooler in a tailgate.
And that's cold.
And that's cold if you're in the SEC because the beer's got to be cold.
Yep.
And the authorities kind of look into it, but it's all really half-hearted. But this death in particular cut Mollie to the bone because in 1902, Mollie and Roan were together briefly in an arranged Osage marriage. Mollie was only 15 at the time, but because the marriage was made as part of an Osage custom, there was no need for a legal divorce because she was never legally married to him in the state of Oklahoma.
Sure.
And she never told her husband, Ernest, about the Osage wedding. It was a secret. The Osage people at this point, they're just terrified.
Yeah.
People are being killed off one by one. Nobody seemed to really care other than other people in the Osage tribe. Bill Smith was telling people that he thought he was getting close to finding the killer of Anna, his sister-in-law. And after this, Bill and Rita hear rattling outside their home for a few nights, and it spooked Rita so much that the two of them moved, leaving all their possessions in their first home to move into another beautiful home, the former home of Dr. James Schoen, one of the autopsy guys.
Oh, okay.
So just so you realize this, they have a gorgeous home filled with beautiful furniture and cars in the backyard, in the garage.
Sure.
They walk away from all of that into another 2-story beautiful home and fill it with furniture again. They have the money to have 2 homes.
But they're so afraid that they didn't care. They just left.
They just didn't care. And they had the means to do that because that's how much money these people are making.
Gotcha.
By March of 1923, the dogs in the neighborhood of Bill and Rita were dying. They were being poisoned. People were just finding their dogs on their front porch.
See, now
dead.
you're getting.
Now you've crossed the line.
Yeah.
It's like John Wick.
Don't mess with John.
Don't mess with the dog.
Yeah, exactly.
And then John Wick just loses his mind.
Yeah, as would any dog lover.
Yeah, but these dogs are being poisoned.
Yeah.
On March 9th, 1923, Bill went out with some buddies, a bootlegger, a possible train robber who'd performed at Madison Square Garden as a rodeo star named Henry Grammer.
Okay.
Henry hung out with some pretty bad boys, too. Asa Kirby, a robber, and John Ramsey, a cow wrestler.
Okay.
They all seem to be criminals. It's like there's these wonderful Osage people.
Yeah.
And then everybody who moves in these boom towns, they're just all horrible people. They're just all criminals.
Yeah, greed is...
They're coming in for the money. Yeah.
Yep.
Now, when Bill gets to Henry's place, he finds out that Henry's not there. So he gets several jars of whiskey along with an unnamed friend and then dropped off his friend and headed home. And when he got there, Rita was in the house with their 19-year-old white servant named Nettie Brookshire.
Okay.
They all retired for the night and went to bed. At 3 a.m., the new home of Rita and Bill Smith exploded.
Oh.
It was so loud and the blast was so large, it bent signposts and took down trees in the neighborhood, not just around their house, in the neighborhood.
Wow.
Rita is killed in the blast. Bill, however, survives. They take him to the hospital where he's going to die in 4 days. Now, by this time, even the outside investigators are corrupt. They're taking bribes not to look too deep into the deaths. Even the governor of Oklahoma was impeached just 1 year after taking office because he was taking bribes from oil men.
Jeez.
But then a white man named W.W. Vaughn, or W.W. as we would call him in the South, he's a 54-year-old attorney from Pawhuska. He tries to right some of these wrongs. He was a former prosecutor who was just tired of seeing what was going on, and he had worked closely with some of the investigators. In June 1923, W.W. gets an urgent call from George Burkhart, nephew of the legendary Chief James Burkhart.
Okay.
And it's thought that James had been poisoned. So now the chief has been poisoned, and his nephew is calling W.W. They rush James Burkhart to a hospital in Oklahoma City, and George tells W.W. that Chief James Burkhart has information about the Osage murders, but would only speak to W.W. Vaughn because he trusted him, because he knew he was a good man and a friend to the Osage people.
Was he?
Oh, yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Well,
He
everybody else
absolutely
is
was.
corrupt.
There are just a few bright spots
Okay.
in this.
All right.
There are really some nice, good white men who want to help.
Gotcha.
And then there are others who are just the devil
Yeah.
in disguise.
Sure.
WW tells his wife, who had just had their 10th child, and I wrote in the margin, "Damn, son, let her get some sleep." He tells her before he leaves he has a hiding spot where he's been keeping evidence that he gathered on the murders, and if anything happened to him, to get the information to the authorities.
Really?
Yes.
Good man.
So Vaughn gets to the hospital. W.W. Vaughn gets to the hospital, and James Burkhart is still conscious. He makes everyone leave the room except for Vaughn, and he gives W.W. Vaughn incriminating documents and tells him exactly what he knows. W.W. stays at James's side until he passes away. Vaughn then calls the new Osage sheriff to say, "I've got some information that you need to see, and I'm rushing back on the next train."
Okay.
The sheriff asked him if he knew who poisoned Chief James Burkhart, to which W.W. replied, quote, "Oh, I know more than that," end quote.
Oh, uh-oh. Here we go.
Yeah. W.W. Vaughn is seen getting on the train, but he never arrives back at Osage.
Wow.
2 days later, his body will be found alongside the tracks 30 miles from Oklahoma City, where he got on the train. He'd been thrown from the train.
Wow.
And just like McBride, he'd been stripped of his clothes. The documents Chief Burkhart gave to him were gone. And when his widow went to the hiding place, that evidence was also gone.
Oh, my gosh. Wow.
The conspiracies. It's crazy.
As my dad used to say, the plot thickens.
The plot just keeps on thickening.
Yeah.
By this time, 24 Osage people have died. People were dying everywhere. And if you knew something, you were soon dead.
Yeah.
So, today it's like, if you see something, say something.
Yeah.
Well, back then it was like, if you know something, keep your mouth shut.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
After the bombing of Rita and Bill's home, the Osage asked the federal government, please help.
Yeah.
But Mollie knows no one is left in her family except for her. And she knew, I'm next. It only makes sense. My whole family's been killed off.
Yeah.
I'm next.
Yeah.
William Hale tells Mollie that he will avenge the death of her family's blood.
Whatever, William.
But even his pastures were set on fire.
Really?
Distract, distance, dispute.
Yeah.
Distract, distance, dispute. William Hale is a master of this. And after Bill and Rita's deaths and the Osage asking for federal help, in walks J. Edgar Hoover and the Bureau of Investigation, which would become the FBI.
Wow.
He sends in Agent Tom White, a former Texas Ranger. White was 6'4", was built like a brick you-know-what, and wore a suede Stetson.
Oh, there you go.
This was a man who did not want to be messed with.
I just envision the swinging doors to the bar flying open and him walking through.
Yeah.
And you just see a silhouette.
Yeah, he was a good-looking guy, really built, suede Stetson.
Yeah.
And I wrote Stetson hat, and then I realized that is redundant. It's just a Stetson.
That's Stetson, yeah.
Yeah. He was there to gather facts. That was all. The Bureau had no power to arrest anyone at that time.
Okay.
Tom White goes through all of the deaths and all the information, and he sees that one family in particular has been targeted.
Yeah.
But there's no interview with the remaining living person in the family, Mollie. There's no interview of her in the files.
Yeah.
No one had spoken to her. He also sees that any time anyone would bring evidence forward to the local and state authorities, the judges who were in office and the prosecutors who were there were all men who lived in the back pocket of one man, William Hale.
That was very to say. Yeah. Mr. Hale.
Yeah.
That name, like I said, just keeps popping up more
It does.
and more and more.
I told you, wolf in sheep's clothing.
Yep.
Tom White knows they need to go undercover. He calls J. Edgar Hoover and says, look it, I need boots on the ground. I don't just need boots on the ground. I need boots on the underground.
Yeah, exactly.
And here's who they were. John Berger, a man who knew the case, was one of them. Another was a former New Mexico sheriff and a deep cover operative who looked like an insurance salesman instead of a federal officer. He pretended to be a cattleman. Finally, John Wren, a one-time spy and an American Indian indigenous person, he was part of the Ute Nation.
Okay.
He also joins as an undercover.
Wow.
One by one, these men slip into Osage County, and Tom White starts looking at whatever evidence he can find. None of it had been preserved with the exception of Anna's skull. The undertaker had kept it. And Tom checks it out and sees that the gun was a small caliber, a 32 or a 38.
Okay.
And there's no exit wound and no bullet found during the autopsy or the second time they exhumed her body. So someone had taken this bullet after murdering Anna. Now, whether they did it at the crime scene or they did it during the autopsy, it's still not known.
Yeah. I would think it would have to be at the autopsy, because how would you do it at the crime scene?
I don't know.
Yeah.
I do not know.
Yeah.
But both Schoen brothers, the doctors, they tell him, we don't have the bullet, and it wasn't there. Then Tom enlists the help of a bootlegger and dope pusher named Kelsey Morrison. We talked about him.
Right.
His nickname is Slim. Slim has an arrest warrant for assault, and the Bureau will make that go away if he'll work the case from the inside and tell them what he knows or what he discovers.
Okay.
But no one was more suspicious.
Let me guess. Mr. William Hale? I'm not a smart man, but I know who might be guilty.
No,
No?
that's not it.
Really?
They thought the one person who was so suspicious, after vetting several other theories, was Brian Burkhart, the man who was the last person to see Anna.
Really? Okay. All right.
Yeah.
All right.
So White visits Brian's aunt and uncle, who called Anna, quote, one of those red millionaires, end quote. So no love loss here,
Yeah,
okay?
yeah.
Tom then followed up with all the people who had seen Anna on the town that night. She went to the town of Ralston. They tracked down witnesses that saw her. And who was she with partying? Brian Burkhart.
Yeah.
So Brian's lied about dropping her off. And they start to put together a timeline from questioning these witnesses, all while they're undercover. So Brian and Anna were at a speakeasy until about 10 p.m. Then they headed to another one where they stayed until 1 a.m. And then there's a sighting of the two of them with another man in the car. And when Brian returns to his home at sunrise the next day, he actually pays cash to a neighbor and tells them, don't say a word about me coming home this morning.
Really? Wow.
It's all starting to unravel.
Yeah, big time. Okay.
The one person who said they could ID the third man in the car was Pike, the investigator who didn't give his real name.
Mm-hmm.
He's that private investigator.
Okay.
He's also the private investigator that William Hale had hired in the beginning. But in order to give up the goods, Pike wanted money, lots of it. And he wasn't even talking to them himself. He sent an intermediary on his behalf. He's
Really?
got a liaison.
He's got an agent.
Yes.
Oh, gosh.
An FBI agent, Berger, wrote in a report, quote, it was quite apparent there is some crooked work afoot, end quote.
You think?
And that is a phrase, I'm just telling you now, I'm stealing it. A phrase that I'm going to be stealing and using going forward.
Afoot.
There is something crooked afoot. There is crooked work afoot.
I think that's going to show up in one of your books.
It's going to show up somewhere,
Yeah.
I promise
Yeah.
you. But when Pike is picked up for robbery, Now they got something to bargain with. He gives the name of the man who had an ironclad alibi. So they pressure Pike some more, and little by little it all comes unraveled. He tells them he'd never really been hired to solve the case of Anna Brown. He'd been hired to conceal the whereabouts of Brian Burkhart on the night of the crime.
Wow.
And who was paying him? Brian Burkhart's uncle, William Hale.
He's back.
He's back.
Wow.
Hale went to great lengths to make sure that Brian was never associated with the murder. But why is he protecting Brian?
Yeah.
Then Pike drops the big one. When he was meeting with William Hale and Brian, there was also another man who was sometimes present.
Who was?
Ernest Burkhart, Mollie's husband.
Wow.
Pike tells them Ernest is very careful to never discuss anything about any of the murder cases with his wife, Mollie.
Wow.
And this is when Tom is thinking, what if Bill Smith was actually on to his brother-in-law? What if that's why his house was bombed? But remember, he lived for 4 days, and during those 4 days, he said names in his sleep, in a feverish sleep. And shortly before he died, he met with his doctors, James and David Schoen, and his attorney. They made the medical personnel leave the room. And when they questioned him, the Schoen brothers said they were trying to get information out of Bill themselves about the killer. But no one owned up to blowing up the home. And during that time, Bill said he only had 2 enemies, William Hale and his brother-in-law, Ernest Burkhart.
Wow.
But what Tom White discovers is that James Schoen is the named administrator of the estate of Bill's wife, Rita. He's the guardian.
Okay.
It's all incestuous.
Yeah, big time.
And this paid a ton of money. So they weren't really there to help the investigation. They were just there to make money.
To protect their interest.
Yeah. So this is a scheme that many guardians had. They would control the millions of the Osage, tell them the money was gone or regulated, and pay themselves these huge fees. They were just stealing from the Osage people.
Wow.
Then, posing as a man who wanted to buy property, one of the undercover agents finds out from a woman at a filling station that she'd bought a house on the edge of William Hale's property. Then she adds that his farmland had burned, but she knew that he paid his own workers to start the fire. He wanted the insurance money.
Wow.
$30,000.
Wow.
And it also makes it look like I'm a target too.
Sure.
They blew up this house. They're poisoning these people, but they burned my fields.
Right.
So they start digging deeper on Hale. They're like, okay, this guy, we got to find out what's going on. And they realize that he was the beneficiary of Henry Rowan's $25,000 life insurance policy. And they're thinking, it's pretty clear what's happening.
Right.
Mollie is the last of her family. Her mother, father, all her sisters are dead. If she died, her husband, the nephew to William Hale, Ernest Burkhart, would get all of it. Every family member's headrights would go to Ernest.
Wow.
Yeah. Hale is funneling shares of the mineral trust to Mollie because it's just more money that he gets once she's gone.
Sure. Yeah.
So if he's stealing from anybody else, he's moving that into Mollie's name because they're going to kill her and then her husband is left.
But they've got to get the rest of the money into her account before they knock her off, blah, 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 blah. Yeah.
Yeah, but those aren't the headrights of people that are in her family.
Yeah.
Those come naturally. That comes just down the line to her.
Sure.
But he's been stealing from other people. So he's funneling that into Mollie as well.
Yeah.
But they've got to prove all of this. And what they have is circumstantial evidence. Tom White goes to a guy named Dick Gregg who said that William Hale came to him with money and said, I'll give this to you if you blow up Rita and Bill's house. And they're thinking, okay, he can testify and say this and get a reduced sentence for the charges. And he's sitting in jail, But that's pretty easy to dispute. They'll say he's lying because
Right.
he just wants out.
Sure.
Then people around William Hale began to die. Anyone who could finger him was turning up dead. Not just Osage people, white men.
Wow.
At the same time all this is happening, William Hale is giving away money to people in Osage County. He's giving away money while he's plotting their murders.
Jeez.
Distract,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Then a criminal named Bert Lawson comes forward and says, William Hale offered me money to blow up Rita and Bill's home. And Bert implicates Ernest in this scheme.
Okay.
Now, during all of this, Mollie's diabetes is just getting worse by the day. And in late 1925, a priest gets a secret message from Mollie. She tells him, I'm afraid for my life. I think my life is in danger.
Really?
Yes. And this is when an agent from the Office of Indian Affairs hears a tip that Mollie's diabetes wasn't killing her. She was slowly being poisoned.
Oh.
The priest gets her out of the house and to a hospital where her diabetes and her mysterious illness goes away. Go figure.
Yeah.
And it's believed that maybe her insulin shots were poisoned. And who were her two doctors? The brothers Schoen.
You can't trust anybody in this.
I'm telling you.
Wow.
Yeah, can't trust them as far as you can throw them. And I don't even know if that's good enough. So they get warrants to arrest William Hale and Ernest Burkhart, but they don't have the ability to do anything.
Right.
They can get the warrants, but they can't arrest them. And the law enforcement in town is beholden to William Hale.
Yeah, exactly.
Then Blackie Thompson comes forward. He has absolutely nothing to gain with his confession because he's already in jail. He's been brought in to help, but then he flies the coop and then shoots and kills two law officers.
Whoa.
He's back in jail and he tells authorities he too was offered money to murder Bill and Rita Smith.
Wow.
How many people were offered money to kill Bill and Rita?
Yeah.
Because right now we're at 3.
Yeah.
But Tom White needs somebody to crack the case from the inside. And William Hale is a leader and his nephew is a follower.
Right.
So they pressure Ernest. And then Blackie tells Ernest, dude, the jig is up. I have already told them everything. I've already told them the truth. White also thinks the brothers Schoen had something to do with the murders. But these two doctors, zip it. They do not say anything. Now, after the meeting with Blackie, Ernest cracks and tells them the truth about what his uncle William was up to, what he was doing.
Okay.
And he also gives them the name of John Ramsey. John Ramsey is the man who murdered Henry Rowan for William. And get this, even after his confession and the fact that he was helping to kill her by slowly poisoning her, Mollie refused to believe that her husband Ernest had killed anybody or even wanted her dead so that he and his uncle could take the rights to her family's money. She just doesn't see it.
Yep.
William Hale and Ernest Burkhart are arrested, but the trial is going to be held in Oklahoma, a place where Hale is very connected. He's got really long arms in this state, and he's got most of the judges in his back pocket.
Sure.
So it's not going to be tried in a federal court.
Really?
No. He finagles that.
Wow.
Then Ernest rescinds his confession. Here's what happens.
Jeez.
Hale asks for the trial to be delayed just by 1 day.
Okay.
1 day. And then he has his attorney talk to Ernest. And the next day, Ernest rescinds his confession and says that he, William Hale, and John Ramsey were all tortured and coerced by Agent White. He takes it all back. It all back.
Wow.
They bring in other witnesses, but no one's really reliable. And it's at this point that Ernest flip-flops again.
Wow.
The prosecution speaks with him, and he gets his own attorney instead of using his uncle's attorney.
Probably a smart move.
Yeah. I mean, they're like, look, he's not looking out for your best interest. He's looking out for his own best interests. And he changes his plea from not guilty to guilty.
Wow.
When they decide to take the Henry Rowan case to trial, it's then decided that because he was murdered on tribal lands, it's now a federal case.
Oh.
A place that William Hale's arms don't reach.
They don't go that far.
Yeah. In the end, Ernest was sentenced to life in prison and hard labor. I thought that was interesting because they don't sentence anybody to hard labor anymore. They're just holed up now.
Yeah.
Then it comes in that at least one of the jurors had been bribed. So the judge dismisses them and calls in a whole new crew, a whole new jury. They don't prosecute the defense attorney who was bribing people because the state doesn't want to give William Hale any more time. They don't want to give him any time to maneuver anything.
Gotcha.
And after the jury hears all the testimony and evidence, an all-white jury found William Hale and John Ramsey guilty of murder 1.
Field goal.
Which carried the death penalty.
Oh, wow. Really?
Execution.
Wow.
It's the Wild West.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, they're just shooting people for no reason.
Yeah. And this is in the 20s, so.
Yeah. So death penalty, execution. But they give them both life in prison instead.
Okay.
Now, the next year, Anna Brown's trial comes up. And Brian Burkhart, who drove her away and lied about their night together, he is given immunity for his confession and for pointing the finger to his uncle, William Hale, who orchestrated for a man named Kelsey Morrison to murder Anna while Brian held her in place.
Oh, my gosh.
So he was an accomplice.
Wow.
Not long after, the Great Depression hits the United States. The oil and gas has been depleted from the area, and the little boom towns have all dried up. So white men killed the Osage for their money and took advantage of them, and when the murders were solved, the money was gone. After Anna's murder trial, Mollie dumps Ernest, finally.
You think?
Yes. She then remarries in 1928, and in 1931, she's finally deemed competent to manage her own money.
Wow.
She also becomes a full American citizen. She would die in 1937 at the age of 50. As for Tom White, he left the Bureau after the murder trials, and he became the warden of Leavenworth in Kansas.
Wow.
One of his prisoners, William Hale.
Hate it when that happens.
Karma's a bitch. Yeah.
Oh, wow. Good.
Tom White would live through a prison riot and being shot. He would die in 1971 at the age of 90.
Wow.
William Hale was released in 1947 after serving 20 years with good behavior.
Wow. Okay.
He was an exceptional and model prisoner. That's what I read.
Jeez.
He would live until 1962 and die at the age of 87. He could never set foot in Oklahoma for the rest of his life. All the way to the end, he called himself a true friend to the Osage people.
With friends like that, who needs enemies, right?
Yeah. Deny, deny, deny.
Yeah. Wow.
Ernest Burkhart was released in 1937 and sent back again after robbing a home. He's released once more in 1959 and received an official pardon in 1965. He went back to Osage County, then moved to another county nearby. He died in 1986 at the age of 84.
How do you get a pardon?
Got a pardon.
Wow. Okay.
Yep. His brother Brian died in 1985. He was 86.
Okay.
John Ramsey was paroled in 1947 and then disappeared off the face of the earth. No one can find anything about him. Now, for nearly a century, no one outside of the Osage Nation really knew what happened to them. But now there's a book, Killers of the Flower Moon, and Martin Scorsese is making a movie of the same name.
Really?
With Leonardo DiCaprio
Oh, wow.
playing Ernest, and Robert De Niro is William Hale.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Also in this movie is your buddy, Barry Corbin.
Oh, really?
Plays the Undertaker. That's what I read on IMDb.
Yeah, I've done 3 films with him.
I know. Nice guy.
Yeah, sweetheart.
Now, today, the Osage are unsure how many of their people were actually killed for their headrights in the 1920s.
Yeah.
Also today, the Osage people are more upset that their traditions have suffered. The money was the least important part of their losses. And today, the Osage Nation has 13,307 enrolled tribal members, with 6,747 living in Oklahoma.
Okay.
Their leader is Principal Chief Jeffrey Standing Bear.
Oh, I love that
What
name.
a great name.
Yeah, it's a great name.
But it's such a crazy story, so much corruption. These people who were forced from their home, they're like, hey, we're sticking you out here in these Indian lands. And they're like, okay, you're putting us here, we're buying it. And they were sitting on a gold mine. And it was like, we don't want you here, so we're moving you here. Oh, this is worth some money? Well, then we need to do something about that too. Yeah. So they really got the shaft in this whole thing. Yeah. But if you watch these documentaries of the Osage people, they are truly amazing, truly amazing. And it is such a story.
Wow.
But that is the story of the Osage murders. And that's all I have to say about that. Hey, Hitched to Homicide listeners. Have you read any good books lately? Or have you listened to any good books? All of the Sex and Lies series books, as well as the Jane Doe series, are available on Audible and iTunes. Hotter than hell in half of Alabama, the Sex and Lies series begins with Sex, Lies, and Sweet Tea. There are 9 books to listen to in that series alone. Left as a newborn to die in a dumpster, she has no name. Tossed from foster home to foster home, she has no family. With no known past, she's deemed a perfect fit for a task force Washington denies exists. A selective assassin for the United States government, Jane Doe tracks down known terrorists on domestic soil. The Jane Doe books have been called a bit military, a bit assassin, and a bit genius. Start the new year by listening to a good book by me, Chris Calvert, on Audible or iTunes. Or if you like to read, go to chriscalvert.com and download some free books. And thanks for being a listener of Hitched to Homicide.
Wow, that's a crazy story. And I'm so excited that the movie's being made out of this.
I know.
Yeah.
I know. So everybody be on the lookout. Be on the lookout for that. I told you it was a story about in-laws and outlaws. I did not disappoint.
Yeah, I love anything that Scorsese does, and that cast is going to be amazing.
Yeah. I briefly looked at it, but yes, Leonardo cool. is the bad guy. He's the in-law.
Yeah,
and De Niro's the outlaw.
Also, I want to give a shout out to our friend that's in New Zealand, Erica Griffiths. She, for the last couple YouTubes, has done indexing for us, and I can't tell you how much we appreciate that.
I know. Yeah. She's amazing.
And she even put little Scotty emojis in there and film emojis. And just to let you know,
she's a super fan. She's a super in-law.
Yeah. So Scotty jumps up here with me every once in a while, so he's on camera. And then he has his bed back here. It's a heated bed that he sleeps in during the time.
Yeah, because our dog's not spoiled at all. He has a heated bed.
Not at all. So anyway.
Yeah, exactly. Well, and we talked about Erica. I got to tell you, this case was suggested by one of our in-laws and outlaws, Sonia Dunn. So thank you for that.
Thank you, Sonia.
I went through, found that book, just amazing. They call it Killers of the Flower Moon because the flowers in the month of May, they go through the breeze because of all the winds that they have, and it looks like it's snowing. And when there's a full moon and the flowers are falling, the moon is the killer of the flower moon.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
That's cool.
Yeah. Very interesting. Great book. And again, I'll have a link to it in the show notes.
Nice.
But thank you, Sonia, for suggesting this case.
Thank you, Sonia and Erica. Okay. Well, let's move on and do a little, bless your heart. right. I've got 4 of them today.
Oh my gosh. So many hearts that need to be blessed.
I know. I was
Lord,
only going to do 3,
help us.
all 4 of them were so good that I had to. So. Okay. The number one, this is Mr. James Blankenship is who this is about. While attempting to break in and rob his own mother's home during broad daylight, James Blankenship got spooked and went to hide in the crawl space. When apprehended by police, Blankenship was extremely stunned because he didn't think it was possible to be arrested for burglary during the day. That's right. This guy thought he couldn't be arrested for burglary because it wasn't nighttime.
Burglars. I thought he couldn't be arrested because he was at his mom's place. Did his mom press charges? That's what I want to know.
It's just the fact that he thought you couldn't get arrested during the day.
Well, bless his heart.
Bless his heart.
You can create, you can have a robbery any time of day, honey.
Yeah. All right, number 2, Darren Kimpton. One of the keys to success when completing a burglary is to pick the right target. The best target is likely an empty house, while pretty much the worst possible target would be a house full of police officers.
Wait.
Well, the latter is exactly what Darren Kimpton decided to choose. The house that he selected as his target was already burglared earlier in the evening, and thus police officers were already on scene when Kimpton tried to break in.
What did he miss about the cars out front in front of the house? I mean...
Also, Kimpton tried to rob a separate house earlier that day, but cut himself and fled. However, he left a trail of blood at the scene and could therefore be identified in that crime also.
Yeah. I don't even know if I want to bless his heart.
That's just an idiot.
Yeah. Good Lord.
Yeah.
Bless him.
Number 3, Ruben Zarate. In 2008, an 18-year-old man named Ruben Zarate attempted to rob a muffler shop in Chicago. After demanding money, he was told that most of the cash was stored in a safe that could only be opened by the manager, who wasn't scheduled to come in until a few hours later.
That's pretty standard. Yeah. I can't open the safe, dude. I can't help you.
Well, being the helpful burglar that he is, Zarate left his cell phone number for the store to call him back once the manager arrived.
Y'all just give me a call back and I'll come back.
Of course, the store first called the police and then called Zarate back.
Ugh.
When he came back and noticed the police were waiting for him, he engaged in a brief shootout with the cops before eventually being arrested.
Bless his heart.
I know.
God love him. These people.
I know. And last but not least, Mr. Albert Bailey. In 2010, Bailey and an unnamed juvenile accomplice decided to rob a bank in Fairfield, Connecticut. But in an attempt to speed up the process of the crime, Bailey called the bank in advance to let them know that they were coming to rob it. His obvious intent was to give the bank plenty of time to get the money ready so he could just pick it up and leave quickly. Of course, the bank decided to call the authorities and notify them of the robbers' arrival, and the 2 men were arrested by the police without incident.
I mean... We have become a society where Grubhub delivers your food and Walmart delivers your groceries. And so now people are just like, just come to, I'm going to rob you, but I need you to deliver the money to my doorstep.
I love stupid
Not to mention
people.
the fact that he had a kid as his accomplice.
So there you go. There's my 4 for the day.
Bless his heart. I want to mention somebody posted in the In-Laws and Outlaws about a guy who was cutting off man buns. And somebody wrote, please do this as a story for the In-Laws and Outlaws. And then it got flagged on Facebook that it was not a true story. And that when I read was that the man buns were intact. Crisis averted. The man buns are still intact. So great. In case you read that story and you were worried, let me set your mind at ease.
Yes. All buns are safe.
Well, if you have a bless your heart, or you know somebody's heart who needs blessing, or somebody with a man bun, I'm sorry, some guys look hot with a man bun. I'm not mad about it.
I'm not one of them.
You can send it to us at hitchedtohomicide.com. There's a pull-down menu. You can also suggest a case, just like this case was suggested. We love doing those, and we're going to do even more of them. We're so glad you joined us again this week. That's my amazing husband out there.
And that's my beautiful bride in the booth.
Join us next time on Hitched to Homicide.
Bye, y'all.